Welcome back to the Truth About Cars podcast. I am Tim Healy, the managing editor at the Truth About Cars. This week we have John Vincent from U.S. News and World Report to talk about the best cars for teens, and Matthew Guy is here to discuss NASCAR and the stuff we use. But first, eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So with graduation season in mind, what are the best cars for teens? We'll be discussing that with John Vincent, the Senior Editor and Correspondent for Vehicle Testing at U.S. News and World Report. And we will also be chatting with TTAC contributor Matthew Guy about oil drain pans and a wet and wild weekend of racing. So here in the Truth About Cars podcast, we like to talk about the stuff that we use on our own cars and in our own homes and in our own garages. And with that in mind, we'll be talking with Matthew Guy about oil drain pans. But first, just a reminder that eBay Motors is here for the ride. With the parts you need at the prices you want, and with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, they're guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. So again, talking about the stuff that we use, and this week it's oil drain pans. We're talking with Matthew Guy. Matthew, how are you doing?
Hey, great, Tim. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, man. Good.
So walk us through what your preferred drain pans are when you're doing an oil change on your Challenger or whatever other vehicles you may have at your house.
Yeah, and I know it seems like a super basic item to be talking about on the podcast, but it's something that just about every gearhead is going to use at some point in their automotive career, right? Changing oil for themselves on their vehicle. And there are a whole bunch of different ones out there. So I like to think that the oil change is one of probably, wouldn't you say, Tim, one of the first skills that a person would learn when they're wrenching on their car, don't you think?
I would think so. I believe that's the case when I was in high school taking auto shop. I mean, oil changes are definitely something that most folks, not everybody, but most would start if they're starting to wrench. Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, me too. And I think that it's a great way if any of our listeners are just getting into their first car ownership or just dipping a toe into, you know what, maybe I can do some of this maintenance myself. I think oil changes are a great place to start. So yeah, oil drain pans seem like a pretty basic thing to be talking about on the podcast, but there's a whole bunch of different ones out there. And you can start off with just something that literally looks like a bucket. They're super cheap, they're super affordable, and they look like a very wide, big diameter, shallow bucket. But the difference is a lot of them will have a little spout on the end. Almost looks like a faucet, you know, and that's on your sink in your bathroom. And the purpose of that is to just facilitate pouring the oil, the used motor oil, out into a container where it can be recycled or sent off to one of those facilities or whatever. So I know a lot of people, you can just drain it out into a normal bucket, or you can just drain it out into a paint can or something like that. But these cheaper options for the oil drain pans do have those little spouts, and that makes it a lot cleaner because there's nothing messier than used motor oil, Tim. And
no, it's not.
Oh, it just gets everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just gets absolutely everywhere. So I find that these large, for lack of a better term, shallow bowls with the spout on them, they work really well. And if that's all you can spend or want to spend right now, that's really, really good. Just start with that. I've gotten something that's just a little bit more involved. This one was a little bit more expensive. It was about $30. And you might think, oh God, you know, I'm spending $30 on something that it's only just going to be a temporary home for used motor oil. But I like it because it looks it's very thin. It's only about 5 inches tall. And that's really good for if I'm just sliding under a vehicle. I do jack up my Challenger to change the oil on it because it is low to the ground. And I just want the extra room to roam around in there and take off that stupid plastic shield that you got to take off every time you want to do anything with the engine, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I like this drain pan because it's only about 5 inches tall, so I can slide under there with it. And it's an upgrade from the one that I had before, because there is one single plug, and it is a screw out type that is in the center of this square. It almost looks like a gas jerry can, if you can imagine that, placed on its side. And the side part of this oil drain pan that I have has an indentation so that when the oil drains out, it doesn't splash all over the place and doesn't come back up, and is collected a little bit, because it will probably drain out of your engine more quickly than it will drain into the catch pan that you have here. And the little cap that's there just screws out. It's really easy to do, and that's where the oil, it's all tilted correctly. You don't have to move the bottle around or the catch can around or anything like that. And it just, the oil just flows down into this hole where it's contained by the container. This one is the one I've got is pretty big. It's about 4 gallons. So, I mean, anything that's over the capacity of your car, whether that's 6, 7, or 8 quarts, anything that's greater than that capacity is what you should get, so that you're not dealing with an overflow situation.
Yeah.
I ran into that situation.
Yeah, I don't want to deal with that. Oof.
Oh, not at all. There was one occasion where the can that I had was big enough, but I forgot that I didn't drain it.
Oh, no.
Right?
Oh, no.
So there was already 2 or 3 quarts in this 8-quart pan. And then I started draining the oil out of the car, and all of a sudden it's not, it's filling up. The catch part is filling up. Oh, no. It's like when you're at a party and you accidentally overflow the toilet in the bathroom, right?
Oh, jeez, yeah.
You're there. You're just trying to stop it with your bare hands. So in that instance,
that's images. Yeah, images we don't want to think about. Sure.
Exactly, right. And so I'm just very quickly putting the stopper back in putting the drain plug back in the engine of whatever car I was working on at the time. So, but with this one here, get one that's big enough for you. And one of the big things that I learned is that it's important to have a vent on these drain pans that are catching the oil in an enclosed space. And the first one I had years and years ago when I was a kid didn't have that. It just had the spot where the oil would drain into this oil drain pan. And that did 2 things. One, it didn't drain into it very quickly. And more importantly, it didn't flow out very quickly at all. It would go bloop, 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 whilst you were trying to put it into a recycling container. And I ended up just punching a hole in it with a nail, right, just so that there was a little vent up there in the corner, and try to remember not to tilt it in that direction whilst I was carrying it, right? But now with this one that I have, there's another, it's the same cap. They obviously did it just for cost reasons whilst they were building this blow molded piece of plastic. It's the same plug. You just unscrew that one, and then you've got a vent at the top of the unit so that the oil flows in easily whilst you're changing it from your car, and then it flows out easily whilst you're sending it away to be recycled. So that's, if there's any tips at all, look for a drain pan. If you've got an enclosed one, look for a drain pan that has some sort of vent on it.
Cool. Is there a particular brand that you would recommend we avoid, or conversely you've had great experience with? Or is this one of those things where as long as it's not going to cause an overflow, so as long as you can have enough capacity for however many quarts your car takes, and as long as it's an easy system to use, and we'll talk about recycling oil in just a moment, does it really not matter? I mean, we're talking about something pretty straightforward here.
Exactly, right? It doesn't really matter in terms of brand name or anything like that. If it makes you feel better to get one with a major brand on it, go for it, right? I mean, sometimes these things are just about... what I look for are some of the features that are on them. You know, that vent is absolutely critical these days. Look for one with that.
Yeah, as you said.
Yep. And also, there's some of the ones that are like the one that I know it costs $30 and it's just a piece of blow molded plastic, but there's 2 extra features on it that I really like and that our listeners probably could look for the next time they go shopping for one of these things. One, it's just a very simple 3 little lines that are almost like little barriers or little bollards, or, you know, when you go into a parking lot, they've got those little parts at the front of the parking space so that you don't go too far. You know what I'm saying, right? It's got 3 of those, and that's where, and you can put your filter there. Okay, right? So as you take the oil filter off, you can just plunk the oil filter down in that spot, and it doesn't move around. It doesn't get full of oil elsewhere. But more important than that, because the oil filter tends to be pretty big, more important than that is not losing the drain plug. And
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh my God,
So
yeah.
so many times, right? It's like, okay, almost you're unscrewing it first with your ratchet set, right? And then you start unscrewing it with your fingers because you're getting impatient, and then all of a sudden, it's gone, and bloop, it goes down in the old oil. You can't find it. It's down there somewhere.
Yeah.
So the cool thing that I like about the drain pan that I have, yes, it was $30, but it's also got a little spot where you can put that plug. And
That's really nice.
It's super, super handy, and it's just a little indentation, right? And it just holds that that drain plug in the spot where you know it's going to be. So it might get covered in oil whilst you're draining out however many quarts you've got in your car, but that's fine. Clean it off, and it helps that it's got a bit of fluid on it anyways when you're threading it back in. So look for those two. So less about brands, more about features in this case.
It's also been a really long time since I've changed oil myself, but I would remind people that one way not to lose a drain plug is to make sure the oil is cooled off. Because what I think, at least what I've experienced, is it's easier to drop it when it's hot. Like that stupid song. You burn your fingers and then you drop it, and then it's either in the oil or somewhere on the ground in your garage and you can't find it, or worst case scenario, down a storm drain if you have a drain in your garage. Some people do. So what you said about having a little place to put it is excellent and very, very useful. But I would also suggest one other way of avoiding losing the drain plug is, and I'm not saying you shouldn't buy something like that. That slot is, I would totally buy that because for the reasons you just said. But I would also say if you have it's already slippery enough because it's covered in oil. But if you have it cool enough, it will be a little easier to not drop the drain plug.
You
just
are so right. You're absolutely right, man. I mean, just making sure that it's not the temperature of molten hot lava coming out of your engine. I mean, yes, it doesn't help when it's cold as molasses either, right? I mean, there's
it's true
there somewhere. But the I mean, hats off to anyone who does this for a living, right? Because especially the quick lube places, because people,
I hope they have gloves or something. Yeah,
right, exactly, right. Because these cars rock up and they just shut their engine off. Goodness knows how long they've been running, and they're dealing with these things that are super, super hot. But just not losing the drain plug is probably the feature that I would look for the most in a drain pan these days.
Is there anything else we need to discuss when it comes to oil drain pans, or maybe we can keep this kind of a shorter segment this week because there's just not as many things to really go over on something somewhat simple.
Yeah, and it is a very universal thing. I do think that if there's young gearheads or new gearheads that are listening to the podcast, give this a shot. As maybe your first attempt at turning a few wrenches. There's lots of instruction videos out there on YouTube. Watch 2 or 3 or 4 to make sure the person who's doing the video knows what they're talking about, and you feel comfortable doing the task. And it's a great way to jump into turning a few wrenches for yourself. And also, once you've done this, there's lots of places in just about every major town in the country where you can bring your used motor oil to be recycled and disposed of properly. Sometimes, up around here where I am, you can take it to any garage, and I think technically they're supposed to take it, but wandering into a garage saying, "Hey, you guys got to take this," is probably not the best way to start a conversation.
No.
Right? But I do think that most places would take motor oil to be recycled. And conversely of that, I had it was my very first car, and there was something wrong with the blow-by valve on it. And it was blowing a ton of oil out up into where, the breather normally would be. So I made a different catch can, right? So because it was just clogging up the air filter. It was blowing so much oil through. So I made up a hose, made up a catch can. And when that would get full, I would either pour it back in or whatever. But I would go around to a couple of garages, a couple in particular, and ask them for the used motor oil. And this was 25 years ago, I know, but it was, part of growing up, part of having a beater back in the late 90s. So that was, that's just kind of a fun memory that's coming up as I'm talking about this type of stuff. So recycle your oil properly, bring it to a garage. Most places will take it. Call ahead if you're not sure. And most places will be happy to recycle it properly for you.
Before we wrap the segment, is there anything else you want to say on the topic of recycling, or have you pretty much covered it all?
I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways, to dispose of this stuff. There was a meme that was not a meme, I suppose, but there was a post that was going around on social media that was a clip of an old article from like the 60s that was showing you how to dispose of your oil, and it included dumping it on the ground, right, in a bunch of rocks. Like don't do that, right? I mean,
that's bad.
The old argument of, well, oil came from the ground, so put it back in. That doesn't fly. There's so much other stuff that's been added to it. It doesn't work that way, exactly. So just in terms of recycling, proper recycling, just...
Yeah, be friendly to the environment.
Exactly, right? I mean, just
we all have to live here. Yeah.
We got to live here, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And but with these, the more expensive oil catch containers that we've been talking about, like the one that I've been describing, that was $30. It's all self-contained,
Mm-hmm.
you can, there's a stopper on it. There's several stoppers on it, actually. So it won't be a mess if you're bringing it somewhere. And if you're bringing it to the recycling depot or you're bringing it to a garage, man, you can just bring it there in that thing, from my experience, and they'll just let you, hey, we've got this big drum here, pour it in, and you're good to go.
Excellent. That makes sense. And we will wrap this segment on the Truth About Cars podcast. Sometimes you may need to find yourself doing some repairs to keep your car running. I know years ago I had to put a PCV valve into a car, one of my very first ever, as a teenager, one of my very first ever car repairs. Very simple repair to do. However, it would have been even more simple if eBay Motors had been around, because with eBay Motors, with over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride or die stays running smoothly. With brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and exclusions apply. Welcome back into the Truth About Cars podcast. I am Tim Healy, the managing editor again, and this week we have John Vincent from U.S. News and World Report with us. He's going to talk about the best cars for teens. John is the senior editor and correspondent for vehicle testing at U.S. News and World Report. And again, we're going to go over the best cars for teens because it is graduation season. So, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, John, can you first start by walking us through, before we go over the cars that are on this list, can you go ahead and walk us through the methodology for this article?
So, Tim, we're starting into what experts call the 100 deadliest days for teen drivers, this summertime. And what vehicle you choose can really affect, how your child's going to survive the next 100 days. And if they do have an incident, how they're going to do in that incident. So what we've done is we've looked at cars, from new cars, used cars, from across the spectrum, and come up with what we believe are the best cars for teens. To do that, we look at the car's overall ranking in our system, predicted reliability, because you don't want your teen broken down alongside the road. We look at safety. We look at advanced safety technologies, and specifically those that are geared towards teen drivers.
Cool. So you're looking at crashworthiness and what we call, those of us in the industry call ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance Features.
Yes, and beyond ADAS, to include teen driver functions like curfews that alert you if your teen has driven, outside a certain time or outside a certain area. The old song, I told my old man I was driving to the library, but I ended up at the burger stand. Today, your car's going to tell on you if you try and do that.
Yeah, I don't know if I would like that as a teen. I was a pretty honest teen, and I didn't lie to my parents very often. And if I wasn't in one spot where I was supposed to be, it's usually just because we shifted. I was going to go to one friend's house, and at the last second, we decided to go to another different friend's house, or maybe went to the coffee shop or whatever. But you know, there's a part of me it's like, oh, that kind of sucks being spied on by your parents, and then another part of me is kind of like, well, some teens really do lie and get into some serious trouble, so I can understand it.
My guess is that it just adds another layer of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And if your kid's good, then the parents aren't going to be getting any alerts.
That's
If
true.
the kid
That's
is
true.
doing something they shouldn't be, then you have a teachable moment.
Yeah, for me, teaching would have involved speeding, more than anything else.
Same here.
Which I had a teachable moment or two thanks to my local police department anyway back in the day. So there's one way or another to do it. So walk us through the actual cars. So you're looking at different things here. We're looking at both vehicle category and price point. So we're looking at the Hyundai Elantra as an example is the best new car for teens, under 25,000 and over 20,000, whereas the Kia Soul is the best SUV in that same price point, and so on and so forth. You also have a hybrid here as well. So can you walk us through what vehicles really stood out and why?
So if you look at the list, Hyundai did extremely well in this
Yeah, I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that, especially under 30,000. Yeah.
Yep. And they're affordable. They have a 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. So if you buy one when your kid gets his driver's license, that car is still going to have a warranty when they graduate from college.
Mm-hmm.
Cars like the Kia Soul, a ton of utility, not a ton of horsepower, so a pretty safe car. Same goes for the Elantra, as long as you avoid the Elantra N, which might be a little too much car for a new driver.
Mm-hmm.
Hyundai Tucson, similar, great utility, great safety scores, a ton of advanced safety tech on that car. Yeah, they're all the Hyundais are very similar in how they're equipped with safety tech, and it sets them up for success in avoiding accidents and surviving accidents if they do occur.
Yeah, and one thing our listeners should know, looking at the list, it's a lot of Hyundais, as you said, but also a couple Subarus and a Toyota. No Detroit 3, none at all.
No Detroit 3, but most of these cars are actually built in America.
That's true. And I wasn't trying to make that into a built in America versus built overseas thing. It's just more, I think it's more that right now the Detroit 3 aren't offering cars except for the Mustang. The Malibu's on its way out. The Corvette is a Corvette. There's not much, there's no cheap car. Now there are cheap SUVs. The Chevy Trax is excellent and can be had for under $30,000. But I just don't know if the Detroit 3 really have a lot of offerings that would appeal to teens right now, or parents buying cars for teens.
I agree with you. And the other part of that is you look at predictive reliability, and the Detroit 3 is kind of getting crushed in that area right now. Yeah.
Same old story. I mean, it's been going on my entire life.
Yeah. I mean, Hyundai, Kia, Toyota, Subaru, they've all, caught up with the best in the business when it comes to predictive reliability, and they're hard to beat.
Yeah, and that's a funny thing too. Some of our readers actually get a little bit verklempt about it. They kind of think that, oh my God, Hyundai and Kia are so bad. And it's like, well, they were, but that was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Probably longer than that, probably at least 20 years. Hyundai and Kia have really made strides in terms of reliability, design, performance, and just overall appeal to buyers.
And they did it in half the time it took Toyota to do the same thing.
That's amazing. I mean, and Toyota's done a pretty good job of that as well, too. Now, I will say one vehicle on this list is on its way out, though. That is the Subaru Legacy, I believe, is not going to be around much longer. So I don't know what would be replacing that.
Yep. I don't know that they have a direct replacement.
Oh, no, I meant on your list when you do this in 2025. My apologies for
sure. There. I think in 2025, we'll start to see some electric cars show up on the new car list.
Yeah, no, I meant in that category. I'm thinking in the 35, maybe the Honda Accord. It says here 30K to 30K. I don't know if you mean 30K to 35. I think it might be a typo. But I would think the Honda Accord might be in that list, depending on pricing. I haven't checked Accord pricing recently. It might be a little over 35 now.
Yeah, I think the Accord and Camry are starting to push up there, but I think you can still get models for below 35K on both.
Yeah. Well, there is a new Sonata, so maybe the Sonata will be on the list, joining all the other Hyundais next year.
And the K5, right?
Yeah, new K5 as well. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Sedans they're just not that many left anymore, especially at that price point. So you might be right. It might be EVs. It may be smaller cars that gain in price, or it may be a compact crossover.
Right. Absolutely. Compact crossovers are the biggest segment of the market right now.
I could see a Toyota Corolla Cross being in that. Depending on how you price it, I think those are right around a little under 30 to a little bit over 30, depending on options. I could see a Corolla Cross on the higher trim, maybe sliding in, although again, that would be an SUV category. So it's a little bit, you guys have your work cut out for you if you're going to be losing some sedans. You know what I mean?
Yep, because there's that gray area between what's an SUV and what's a car.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a struggle. What's a station wagon? I mean, why is the Subaru Outback considered a car and a Toyota Crown Signia considered an SUV?
Right.
Very gray areas.
Yeah, and I actually had a discussion with another journalist. I think you and I both know last week. He in his mind, a Hyundai Ioniq 5 is a hatchback. In my mind, it's a bit of a crossover. I could be wrong. And then, another vehicle that's kind of in that area is the Subaru Forester. Is it a tall wagon or is that an SUV?
I think the Forester in its newest iteration is an SUV.
Makes sense.
I think it's moved up.
So
I think the Outback is an SUV too, and it's still classed as a wagon.
Yeah, for sure. So do you have not to get personal, but do you have children in the teenage range or approaching teenage range?
I do not. I have a dog.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have children either.
Bought a minivan for my dog.
Okay. Yeah, so I was going to ask you if you had children, what would you recommend aside from the U.S. News and World Report list, or would it be a car that's already on the list?
I would absolutely feel comfortable putting my kids behind the wheel of either a Hyundai, a Kia, or a Honda.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the Civic, I know it's not on the list, the Honda Civic is still a strong option. Especially
strong option. Used Honda Accord, fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the previous generation, especially before it went all hybrid. Not that there's anything wrong with hybrids. Hybrids just are a little more expensive to fix, but the previous gen Accord was great.
Yep, I agree.
And if I had children that were teens right now, I would also add to that list, in addition to the Civic, I mentioned it before, but the Chevy Trax. I couldn't stand the first generation Trax. I thought it was one of the worst cars on the market. It's lucky that when I went to the launch, Chevy's lucky that when I went to the launch for that, I was at the time an analyst, and I don't think I wrote a review for public consumption. I honestly don't remember. I think most of that was going as an analyst and getting background when I was invited to that drive, because I would have been really, really harsh on that vehicle. And I didn't drive a Trax again until last summer, and I thought, oh my God, it's so much better now.
The previous generation in that category had some really terrible cars.
Mm-hmm.
The Trax, the Ford EcoSport.
Oh yeah, the EcoSport.
And the new Trax and its sister car, the Buick Envista, are fantastic for the price. They look good. They're well equipped. They're just the rock stars in that category right now.
Yeah, and I just drove the Envista for the first time at an press event, just a quick 15-minute loop, and really mostly impressed. There were some spots where you could tell that the materials were a little bit down market for a Buick, and you're like, well, they didn't make enough differentiation between the Chevy and the Buick here. But
the differentiation is in how quiet it is in the cabin.
Yeah, it was quieter than the Trax, and the on-road manners where I thought, the Trax the Trax Active is pretty sporty and fun to drive. The Envista I thought was a little sporty. It was as sporty, if not a little sportier, and the ride was a little more composed. So there definitely are some. It's definitely impressive, and there are some advantages over the Chevy, and even the Chevy Trailblazer has improved somewhat.
Somewhat, yep. It's still, it's still Trailblazer, and they have some work to do on it, but it's not bad. And given that it has a 3-cylinder engine, you don't think it's going to be able to do much, but it can.
Yeah. So as we talk cars for teens, I want to ask you. Let's take it in a slightly different direction. We're talking about modern cars for teens. But what did you have as a teen? Do you remember? Now, I didn't mean to make it sound like you're old. I'm just, some people really care about, as car people, you probably were really into your car as a teen, so I wanted to walk you through it.
So my cars were boring. The car that I drove through part of high school was the family car.
Uh-huh.
It was the 79 Impala wagon,
Oh, wow.
nicknamed the Barge.
Okay.
My father thought something was wrong with the brakes in it because we kept going through brakes. He did not know that the car had been airborne several times. And
That's
then
hilarious.
I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a new car while I was in high school, and that was an 83 Honda Accord. And that was a great car.
Yeah, so those old Accords. So my parents tended to collect more cars than we had people in the house. We had 3 people. I'm an only child. And we had pets, but we didn't transport them a ton. We walked our dog or we only really transported the dog or cat at the vet, right? So at the time, my first car was an 84 Bronco 2, Ford Bronco 2. My parents bought new in 84, held on to it because they knew they were going to get rid of it, and they realized I was closing in on driving age. And like, okay, because they keep their cars a long time. So that car never really ran well. The carburetor had issues. It was carbureted. And especially in the wintertime, it just needed to idle for a really long time. And I'll try to keep the story short because I probably told it in the podcast before and don't want to bore people. It was an automatic. It had 4-wheel drive with manual locking hubs. I had to 2-foot drive it a lot. So you may have heard that old Indy cars, I think the new ones still do this too. When they go to the pit at Indy 500 or a race, they keep their right foot on the throttle so it won't stall out. I had to do that a lot until maybe, once the engine finally warmed up, I could drive it like a normal person. But I had the 2-foot drive a lot. So left foot brake, right foot, keep it revving, throw it in the neutral at a stop sign, stuff like that. Sometimes my parents would start it when they left for work, and they left for work before I left for school. And they would start it and let it idle on a cold day just so it would be warm up. And I'd still throw it in reverse to back out of the driveway after I had showered and gotten ready. It would still die out. So that thing had some issues in terms of running well, but it did have a great turning circle, amazing turning circle. And it was Eddie Bauer edition. So
the Eddie Bauer edition.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Green on tan on green. Go ahead, John.
It's probably good that you could not drive it very quickly because you would have laid it on its side.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It was not a human. It was a rolling speed limiter. I could not go faster than 55 if I tried. In fact, I was not allowed to take it on the freeway, I don't think, or chose not to take it on the freeway. If I had to go on the freeway for anything, I'd borrow one of my parents' cars, and they had, at the time, an 88 GMC Sierra with the 5.7, and then cab and a half, and then they also had, I want to say, a 93 LeSabre that came from my grandparents, but my dad bought from my grandparents. The LeSabre was awesome because it had great straight line speed. I'm not going to say how fast I got it up to because I don't know what statute of limitations are. I'm sure they're passed, but just to be safe, there was a few high-speed runs in that thing because it was great in a straight line. Couldn't handle for shit. Excuse me, I think it's supposed to be a clean podcast. Couldn't handle for anything. Let's put it that way. I think one word is okay. But yeah, it was great in a straight line. A very comfortable car. We also had, you mentioned Accords, and that's where I was going with this. We also had 2 88 Accord hatchbacks that rolled through the house. Why we had 2, I don't know. I think they were supposed to be my first cars, and my mom decided she liked the Bronco for me better because it was a little bit higher riding and had the 4-wheel drive for snow. But the Accords were kind of fun. They were both hatchbacks, automatic transmissions, but they handled kind of fun. One ran really well. One had some issues, but they were both a little bit of fun. Unfortunately, we didn't keep them real long. My dad flipped them and sold them, but I think one of them ended up being sold to a friend of mine. And then, of course, I did finish my high school career and my teenage career. I drove it all through college, or mostly through college. I had a 1989 Fox body Mustang 5-liter LX with the manual transmission. So that was a fun car.
Very nice.
I was the third owner, bought it from a car salesperson. It had some issues with some rust on the tailgate. Eventually, first gear stopped working. Would jump out of first gear, but that was down the line. And had a trailer hitch because somebody had towed an ATV with it. So it had a sagging rear bumper because probably shouldn't be towing with that thing. But I will say the engine was bulletproof. The engine never gave me any trouble. So snow gave me a lot of trouble, especially because I bought it with Goodyear Aqua Treads on it, and those were great tires in the rain and crap everything else. Eventually got all seasons, and the car was much, much easier to handle. Also, by that point, I'd been driving through 5 winters and had really learned how to snow drive. So there we go. That was my teenage car, and I really encourage our listeners to, if they comment on this post, to mention their teenage vehicles as well. Anything else?
I gotta know, did your Accord hatchbacks have the louvers?
No, I don't believe so.
Louvers were huge in that era.
I kind of remember that. I don't recall our cars having that. Accords were popular in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is kind of a lot of American cars, but also like my next door neighbors had an Accord sedan. A lot of Accords and Camrys because they were so popular in the 90s. So, but I don't recall our Accords having the louvers. The louvers, though.
Yeah, it made them incredibly hard to wash.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Ours were not so difficult to wash. Is there anything else when it comes to teen vehicles you'd like us to know before we wrap the segment?
So let's talk a little bit about buying a used car for teens.
Yes. These are all new. I'm glad you brought that up. That was on my list of things to ask you. Your list is all new cars. I'm glad we switched. I'm glad we sort of segued back to it because used cars are probably what most teens end up getting anyway.
Exactly. They're the only really affordable cars out there right now.
Yeah, we've done a few episodes on that.
So with a used car, I advise parents that if they're looking at a used car, look for one that's new enough to have some of the new safety features. At least a backup camera,
Mm-hmm.
Preferably automatic emergency braking,
Mm-hmm.
blind spot warning, and those technologies have been out long enough that you can easily find used cars with those on them.
I'm glad you mentioned those three technologies because those are the three. So I'm someone who, outside of vehicle testing, I don't love all the ADAS systems. I'm not sure I would pay for certain ones, at least not right now if I was buying a new car. But blind spot monitoring, especially living in the city, is huge. And that's one of the few ones I would definitely pay for, that and rear cross traffic. And I've also had experience with that. I did have a minor fender bender in my early 20s, backing out of a parking spot. Could not see any of the side. I also, after my Mustang, I had an Accord as well. Another, not a hatchback, a two-door coupe from a little bit. Not the 80s hatchback that I was talking about a few minutes ago. This was a 97, I think. So before that technology was available, backed up to the parking spot, had a minor low-speed collision, did some very minor damage. And so rear cross traffic and blind spot monitoring, I think, are huge, especially for a new driver who's still getting used to the idea of changing lanes. Like you said, automatic emergency braking and backup camera. Backup camera is huge, especially if you live in the suburbs and have sidewalks crisscrossing and young children playing. I think that's huge. And then I think automatic emergency braking would have saved me from my very first car accident when I was 18 years old. I was in slow speed, stop and go traffic. Something distracted me on a sidewalk. I don't know if it was somebody I knew walking by or whatever. Looked aside for a second at like 5-10 miles an hour. Car in front of me had stopped unexpectedly. I rear-ended them. That happened to me again in college. Same scenario. I got distracted by something, low speed, under 10 miles an hour. It was one of those things where I didn't plan on stopping. Somebody made a turn or something. So the two fender benders I was in as a youngin would have been saved by automatic emergency braking. Even though I don't always love the system now, and I think sometimes it has false alarms, in those two cases, it would have been perfect.
So another thing that some people consider a safety feature, which, kind of divisive and very hard to find now, but buying your teen a vehicle with a manual transmission.
Yeah. That'll be hard to steal.
Hard to steal. You have to stay, with your concentration on the road, so you can't use your phone and text while you're driving a manual.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think also for sleep-deprived teens, so when I was in college, I had the Mustang and it was a manual, and sometimes I get a little tired driving back and forth to my parents' house to my college. And sometimes I'd have pop off the freeway and force myself to shift on back roads because it would keep me awake. So teens who often have weird work schedules, work at night, go to a friend's house, teens sleep a lot but also stay up late. The manual transmission forces them to concentrate.
Yep. And it keeps them engaged. And also, if they're in a weird situation where, they need to drive somewhere and the only car available is a manual, they can't get stranded. It gives them another tool in the toolbox to be able to drive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that's really big. I think we didn't grow up with that. I didn't have my first cell phone my first real cell phone that was my own until I was 20 or 21. I mean, when I was a teen, my parents let me borrow their phone. They had a cell phone, a primitive Motorola. They let me borrow it once in a while. If I was going out somewhere and they knew they were going to be home, they knew they weren't leaving the house, and if there was an emergency. But cell phones weren't distracting back then the way they are now. You didn't call just to call. You didn't text just to text. Texting didn't exist, and calling was expensive. You only called, with a purpose. If there was an emergency, or I'll meet you there. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I'm going to be 5 minutes late. Hang up. So I think that's something that today's parents need to really think about, that we didn't have to growing up.
Exactly. And they need to think about using the technologies on the phone that prevent you from using the phone while you're driving. The phones can sense motion, and if they sense you're driving, they go into a mode where they don't alert you to every text that comes in or every call that comes in.
Do you think that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and things like that are also helpful to avoid driver distraction for teens, or do they make it worse?
I think they're fantastic. I think they help a lot. Anything that keeps your hands off the phone is great. And I think you and I were both in an event last week where we were driving cars where the manufacturers made a decision to not include Apple CarPlay. And I think that's a terrible decision.
I know which event you're speaking of. I was not there. I saw you at an event just before that, but the vehicle we drove when I saw you is available with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. I think you're talking about General Motors, and I was not on that event, but I know what you're talking about.
I think that, it's a corporate decision based on wanting to get our information, and they're going to sacrifice some safety for drivers by doing so.
I agree. And I think they're going to sacrifice some safety and some convenience. And now I think if General Motors wanted to replace CarPlay with its own version of CarPlay that worked just as well, that'd be one thing. And the data thing is a concern with CarPlay just as much as without. So I'm not going to say CarPlay is completely innocent here, or Android Auto for that matter. But I think General Motors is being a little short-sighted in terms of profit, or trying to profit, because it's like, to me, if you can't beat them, join them, right? So if you can't do a better job than CarPlay, then might as well just offer CarPlay. If you can do a better job, then compete, then offer that.
And when you bring this up, they talk about all these workarounds to get basically CarPlay functionality using the GM system, but they are workarounds, and it's 2024. We want things that work, not workarounds. Right.
And generally speaking, before CarPlay was a thing, automakers did and still have their own navigation systems. If you don't have CarPlay, if you don't have an Apple phone or don't want to use CarPlay, you have that option. In a lot of vehicles, you have the option of voice recognition and can read you text. It can do most OEM vehicles have for quite a long time been able to do a lot of what CarPlay can do. They just don't do it as well.
Or as elegantly.
Yeah. It's not one system. And it's gotten better, but I do recall, and I think General Motors vehicles were where I ran into some of the problems. Early on in my car testing life, I started testing cars on a regular basis right around 2008 or 9, probably 2009. And so CarPlay came out a few years later, but some of the systems I tested early on, and I think some of the Chevys and General Motors products were part of the issue. They would oftentimes disconnect from your phone, or they would just not work real well. And I'm sure it's better now, but it has to be much better than it is for it to really work as a safety feature that doesn't distract drivers.
Right. I mean, CarPlay and Android Auto are still not perfect. You still get the disconnections, especially with the wireless.
Yeah.
But it's getting better. It's tough technology because it's the phone maker, it's the car maker, it's different software versions in each. So a lot of things have to mesh for it to work perfectly, but it's getting better.
Yeah, and you are correct about the disconnections. I actually had a Land Rover Defender last week, and it connected to my CarPlay wirelessly, flawlessly, except for I was at Road America for an event, and at a particular spot at Road America, maybe it was the Wi-Fi picking up from the building. It was a parking lot right near a building we were going into to have dinner and meals, or to have lunch, excuse me. Every time I drove into that parking spot, CarPlay went away, and every time I pulled back, it worked. In fact, I actually wrote in a little capsule review that the Defender didn't have any electrical problems. And now I'm thinking about it. Well, it did lose CarPlay in that one spot. So the disconnections do happen, and it's not perfect, but it's much better, and it is something that if I had a teenager, I would consider I would probably err on the side of it, like you said, helping avoid distraction as opposed to making it worse.
I agree.
Okay, that may be about all the time we have for today. Is there anything else you would like to go over with us on your methodology on this best cars for teens 2024, or anything else you want to talk to us about that you've got coming up?
I would just say, if you're a parent, think about the car that your kid is driving and think about ways to make that car as safe as possible for them. And, work to trust your teen and get them out there driving, because experience is the best thing they can do.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Want them to have a lot of experience before they head off to college. So get them out there on the road, give them that confidence.
Yeah, and this is a separate topic, but I don't love how some states worrying about teen driving say, "Oh, we should raise the driver's age, minimum age, and all that." No. It's not about the age. I mean, you don't want kids too young, but to me, it's about experience. And I had a little bit of driving experience just from driving on farm country back roads when I started driver's ed. I had driven a car slowly a few times, on private land, and my drive partner in driver's ed had not, and it showed. He had more to learn than I did, and I still had a lot to learn. I still wasn't ready to get a license until I went through the whole driver's ed program. And back then we didn't have enough hours behind it. I think it was only like 6 hours for me to get a license in the 90s, and now it's closer to 20 or 25. And I think that's better. In my view, I think kids should start at like 15, not wait till 18, but they should also get a lot of experience with supervision to really learn how to drive a car, because I think experience is the best way. And I would also add to what you just said in terms of making your car as safe as possible, whether you buy a new car or used car, or no matter what safety features it has. I make sure that the tires are good. I would make sure that the car is well maintained and is not going to have any safety issues from not being maintained. That would be my 2 cents as well.
Oh, absolutely. The last thing you want is your teen driver broken down on the side of the road.
Yeah, or driving around on tires that are not good, and then getting in inclement weather and losing control in a situation where they might not have lost control on dry pavement, because most teens don't know how to handle a car that loses control. And in fact, one thing I got lucky on too, I got invited to one of those dealer events, and I don't know why. We were on some marketing list, my folks and I, where they taught car control to teens, and they wet down a rubber sheet, and they had you go to a certain speed, and you had to learn how it felt to skid. You learn how it felt when a rear-wheel drive car broke loose or front-wheel drive car broke loose. I think all teens should learn that too. If it's not in a real car in an empty parking lot, then in a simulator.
And there are more of those programs out there now.
Yeah,
teen survival. There are programs in every major city.
Yeah, so that'd be great. I think that would also arm your team with knowledge. But again, make sure the tires, at the very least, are well maintained.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, we thank you for your time. Once again, we've been with John Vincent, the Senior Editor and Correspondent for Vehicle Testing at U.S. News and World Report, talking about the best cars for teens in 2024. It is graduation time, or will be soon. For us, it was early June. For some folks, it's May. So it will be, if your teen hasn't just graduated from high school, they're a couple of weeks away. So this is a very, very topical article. John, once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And we're back to Truth About Cars podcast. We always talk about NASCAR, and we're going to talk about the Coca-Cola 600 on Memorial Day. We're also going to talk about some non-NASCAR stuff that is still racing related, and some crossover between NASCAR and Indy. So once again, we're bringing in Matthew Guy to discuss what happened in NASCAR, and Kyle Larson attempting to do the double between the Indy 500 and the Coke 600, which did not happen due to weather. So before I bring Matthew in, I'm going to just talk real briefly about my own experience watching racing on this kind of, I basically call it Motorsports Sunday, right? I wake up, I didn't get up in time for the beginning of Monaco. I slept in a little bit just because I could. But I tuned into Monaco about 15 laps in, had that on in the background while I was making breakfast and doing some other stuff. And it was just sort of kind of a boring race. And I know this is a NASCAR segment. We're getting there. Bear with me. So I watch Monaco. Monaco ends. I flip over to the pre-race or Indy 500. See they're in a weather delay, and my first thought is, oh gosh, Kyle Larson, the NASCAR driver trying to do the double, and just is it going to happen? Is it going to be maybe he races the Indy 500, finishes Indy, maybe he gets in the car and finishes the last half of the Coke 600 in Charlotte, whatever, something like that, and then we get a 4-hour rain delay, which I thought was just unfortunate because an hour or two he would have been okay. I did read an interview with him where he said if they'd called it and pushed it the next day, he could have done the double more easily, gone to Charlotte and flown back to Indy. But then, of course, that really hurts the fans. And it's frustrating because you can't do anything about weather, right? There's just something you can do about it. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, when's this race is going to get off at some point? Indy gets off, gets in. I get to watch the whole race. I had dinner plans. The race ended just before I needed to leave for dinner. So I didn't have to worry about DVR in the end or missing the end or having it spoiled by news alerts. So it worked out perfectly from an Indy perspective. But then I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have to miss a lot of Charlotte here just because I made dinner plans and all that. And it just didn't even – I hoped they'd do the plans on Saturday, but it worked out to be better Sunday. So whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll record start of Charlotte. I'll be home in time to watch the end of it, and I'll go back and watch the beginning later. Well, I actually ended up catching a bit of the beginning because it was a commercial break during Indy. So I caught the first lap or two of Charlotte and went back to Indy. And before I ramble on too much here, I am going somewhere with this, I promise you. So then I went to dinner, come home. I'm going to go watch the Charlotte race, and the rain delay started right before I got home. And, of course, they called it. And then the funny kicker is I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to watch it Monday morning. I had nothing going on Monday. It's just night. It's kind of a relaxing day. It's a holiday. I'll watch it, make sure I have everything I need for our podcast episode. And I go to watch the race. Got it on. And then, so we had some severe weather in our area as well. I'm not super far from Indy, about 3 hours northwest. And the Fox broadcast cut in to discuss the severe weather. And I'm all for that. I'm all for making it nice and safe. And people's safety takes precedent over whatever they're watching on TV. However, when I was watching Indy live on Sunday, our local NBC affiliate managed to cut in but still go side by side. So they were talking about the severe weather and telling people to take shelter and all that important stuff, but the race was still on. So those of us who were in the broadcast area but weren't affected by the storms could still see the race. But Fox, for half an hour to an hour, I didn't time it, but it was a very long time, completely shut out the Charlotte race. So I recorded this race and only caught maybe a third or a quarter of it because a big chunk of what I recorded was shut out by local news. So I don't know if you ran into that, Matthew, where you live in Canada, but it was definitely frustrating for me.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, anytime that you're trying to DVR something and then all of a sudden, boom, you've got a breaking news that's coming in over it. Yeah, no, I feel you, bro. I didn't have that experience myself this weekend, but I've had it in the past, and it's like, what? Come on.
Yeah, I do apologize for making you sit through that long story before I brought you in. Normally I bring you in a little quicker, but I just wanted to get that off my chest, and it was kind of like, frustrating. And we definitely want to talk about Kyle Larson doing the double or trying to do the double. Obviously, he was skunked. He landed in Charlotte just in time to put his helmet on. Mm-hmm. And when I watched the replay that I did record on yesterday, I didn't realize until I saw the replay, he was literally getting his Hans, that's head and neck device for those who don't know, getting his Hans device on, as the broadcast said, they're going to red flag the race. And the cars were already at caution at that point. They were just going around. So, and then they cut to commercial, I think, and then they went back to the studio. So I didn't see the cars actually stop. But my understanding is they never came back from the studio and the cars never fired again. So the way I understand it, unless I missed something, they called caution, I think, on lap 245 or 246, and they called red flag at 249, and then they canceled the race. Now, I'm going to let you take the lead on what actually happened when the cars were racing, since you saw more of it than I did. But I know you first of all, I know you wanted to talk about the decision to cancel it, and I know you and I wanted to go over that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was the right decision, of course, to due to severe weather, to throw the red flag when they did, because, I mean, there was lightning and rain was pouring down. There were some good videos on social media. People were out enjoying the rain. They're having their own races, their own foot races in the grandstands and along the side of the track and in the infield, right? So people having a bit of fun on Memorial Day weekend. That's good. But what was it, around 9:30 p.m. Sunday when the race, I mean, it was already official because more than half of it had been completed. For anyone who's new to NASCAR who's listening, it was halted, like you said, after 249 of 400 laps. And that's when they dispatched their Air Titans. Those are the jets and blowers to dry that 1.5 mile track. And the rain stopped around 10:30, from what I understand, from what I've been reading from people who are
10:30 Eastern time.
Yeah, that might have been 10:30 local. So that's Eastern, right? Because they're in the Eastern time zone.
Yeah.
Right. So the rain stopped at about 10:30, from what I understand, and then at 11:30, after the rain had been stopped, they were like, "Yeah, no, we're not going to be able to get this dry in time to do anything with it. We're calling the race right now." So that sucks from a whole bunch of perspectives. Not the least of which is that the Coke 600 is one of the crown jewels and is one of, rightly so, I think, one of the more difficult races to win, because you have a lot of races that, 400 or 500 miles. But I remember it was Darrell Waltrip, DW, who said one time, there's that last 100 miles of the Coke 600 that separates, who's the winner from who's not going to be the winner, because that extra 100 laps of whether it's planning, whether it's pit stops, whether it's fatigue in the car, that really separates out who's going to win that race. And we didn't get any of that, of course, with 249 laps. And, they ran the Coke 350, something like that, right? They ran the Coke 350.
Yeah, I didn't do the math on it, but whatever 246 times a mile and a half would be. Yeah,
sounds about right. But
I'm not sure you want to count the caution laps there.
Exactly. And my take on it is that they can and have in the past picked up a race the next day. Right? Like, okay, so we're going to finish this the next day. Not always the greatest when it's on a Monday, of course, but it was Memorial Day holiday. I was reading a lot of social media reaction. People were saying, look, we're in the area anyways. It's the day off. It's the long weekend. Why didn't you have, or at least try to have the race going on Monday? NASCAR officials wouldn't really have lost anything if they had said, you know what, 11:30, we're going to call it for the night, but we're going to keep a look on it for 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., whatever a.m. the next morning. Maybe we can get it going then, because the rain had stopped. They're blaming the humidity on the track.
That I didn't fully understand.
Nor did I. What's your take?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Not at all. What's your take, bro?
Oh, I was just going to say, as you and I were prepping for this, I disagreed with you a little bit. I thought that was the right call to call it. But I do understand where you're coming from about pushing to the next day. The only thing I can really think of about not pushing it is that you would lose some fans. Some people would have to go home. Probably not as many with a night race, because with Indy, you've got people who booked a flight Sunday night or trying to get out there Sunday night, whereas Charlotte, most people are probably staying over the night anyway. But you would lose some folks who are not locals who have to go home. There are some people who do work more on the weekend, retail and sales jobs, that sort of thing. So you might lose some fans, local and non-local. You probably lose a little bit of TV rating. I don't quite understand what humidity has to do with it. My understanding was the track wasn't going to dry until really late in the evening. And at that point, no one would be watching, right? You'd have a few diehard fans in the stands, but most people would either be sleeping. Those of us who are watching on TV probably would have given up on it. I know it was the night before a day off for me. So without getting into specifics, I was a little bit having some fun, a little bit of wine and stuff like that. So I probably would have tuned out at that point. I have a capacity to watch sports up to a certain time, but when double overtime happens in hockey, or you're watching a West Coast sporting event, depending on the event and how much you like the teams involved, might be times you say, okay, I'm just too tired. I'm done with this. Right. So that goes for racing too. So my biggest take on this was I was just frustrated with the weather overall, and it's really frustrating because there's nothing you can do about it. And apparently it was the worst in Indy since like the 80s, since like 87 or something like that. I did wonder, and I just looked it up before our episode here, why neither NASCAR nor IndyCar runs in the rain with wet tires, with rain tires. And I couldn't get a straight answer. The best I could find from Indy was that, from the Indianapolis Star, which is a pretty trusted source, the local newspaper, is that the Indy cars would just be too slow. And it wouldn't be very fun, because with the treaded tires would be safe enough, but it would slow the speeds down, and also open wheel cars, and they're less open cockpit than they used to be, because now they got a little bit of a safety glass. But you'd also have rooster tails of water hitting drivers. That would not be fun. As far as NASCAR goes, I think it's something to do with, and I couldn't quite verify the source. So if anyone out there knows better than I do, feel free to comment on our post. But I think NASCAR doesn't want to run, at least on an oval, because the speeds will be a little too high. Even though it's funny, IndyCars actually are faster than NASCARs, but I don't know if that's anything to do with it. But there was some concern about maybe speed being too high, or maybe the grip not being there, even with a treaded tire. I'm not quite sure why. I know F1 will run in the race, but F1 is also all street and road courses. Now, there are some stretches of speed in an F1 car that are 230 miles an hour or whatever, well over 200. But they can do it. IndyCar and NASCAR don't. I think it has something to do with the ovals. From what I saw, both Indy and NASCAR would race on a road course with wet tires, or they would race on a street course. So it may have to do with oval speeds or oval banking or oval grip. I'm not quite sure. But I was wondering that. I don't know if you know the answer to that.
No, that sounds about right, just with the speeds and with the, the weight, the distribution of weight, center of gravity, and these things. I mean, these are taxi cabs compared to an IndyCar, right?
Yeah.
So, just with the oval, I can buy that explanation. What I don't buy, though, is, NASCAR saying, it's too late to restart the race at 1 a.m. It's Charlotte's their home track. Just about everyone, they're close to most race teams, except for 3 or 4. Monday's a holiday with many fans likely off work. So that's, if they're going to run a race late, it might as well be at Charlotte, because just about every race team is within a stone's throw of the place. So they're there. They should have let the dogs run. But
again, I think it came back to me. They just weren't going to have anyone watching.
Someone wanted to go home. Someone pulling the levers of power wanted to go home and go to bed. So they said, no, that's it, we're calling it.
I would also point out that in Indy for sure, and I think Charlotte too, if I remember the broadcast that I watched yesterday correctly, or watched the day after, or whatever you want to say it, we patched these episodes together, so the timing doesn't matter too much. But I will say, when I watched the replay, the broadcast mentioned lightning, so that may have played a part too, because that's what I was thinking too. Even if you could run the cars in the rain, you don't want fans to get hit by lightning. You're outdoors, exposed, metal grandstands, metal fencing, So I know that was an issue last year when NASCAR was here in Chicago, as we talked about on our last episode. So I know that, lightning's an issue, and I think that was part of what happened at Indy. It was not just the track was going to be wet, but that the fans had to evacuate the grandstands for I don't know how long, an hour or two, I think it was. So, that's something you have to keep in mind too. Even if the cars could run in the rain, or even if they said, okay, well, we can dry the track and we'll run the race till 1 a.m. What if there's lightning going through? So I don't know how much that played a part in Charlotte, but it definitely did in Indy.
Yeah, I agree. You can't have fans getting zapped up in the stands. If there's lightning in the area, clear out, right?
No, they're getting zapped
makes
up.
A lot of sense.
Yeah, they're getting zapped up in a different sense than the snake pit anyway. So,
But I'll tell you what.
From what I hear, anyway.
Exactly. I'll tell you what with Larson, though. I mean, huge props to the man. I mean, okay, sure, he didn't turn.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was about to switch over to that discussion, him doing the double. Yeah, so go ahead.
I know he didn't turn a single lap at Charlotte. I mean, Mother Nature ruined it. But, he made the effort. He did run the Indy 500. He finished 18th. And he ran in the top 10 for a significant portion of the race. I
think he would have finished top 10 or top 15, but he had, I believe it was a speeding penalty. I'm trying to check my memory here. I watched the whole race live, but it was a lot to take in. When I say live, I mean on TV. I wasn't actually there. But I believe he had a speeding penalty on pit road. And I think that's what cost him a few spots. I think is why he finished 18th as opposed to a little bit higher.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it, Jimmy Johnson finished, 12th when he ran it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, and like you said, I mean, I do think that Larson may have finished higher in the running order.
He led 4 laps. I mean, mostly because people are pitting, so kind of by default, but he still did lead 4 laps.
He still
4
did,
or 5 laps,
right?
something like that, yeah.
Exactly. So I think, I mean, if the man ever chooses to do this again, and the weather cooperates,
we'll be having a much different
conversation on the podcast, and I hope he does too.
Yeah, I hope he does next year. He sounded kind of down on the idea yesterday when he did an interview, or the day before, whatever day I saw the interview. He did an interview after the race. He sounded a little bit down on it, because he was upset that he couldn't finish it. But I think that's just the emotion talking. And I think his bosses are all for it. I think Rick Hendrick and Jeff Gordon would be happy to have him do it again. It's good for both sports. Gets a lot of attention on both races, right? especially with either casual fans or non-fans, racing's kind of still a niche sport. It's more popular than it used to be, and I think over the past couple of years, the Netflix series Drive to Survive has really helped with F1. Indy has its 100 Days to Indy, which I've not watched. I don't know if it's really affected popularity, but I think it kind of has. The pandemic gave racing a bit of a boost because it was the first sport to restart and probably the easiest sport to watch when we were all stuck in our homes. It was the easiest sport to put on when we were all stuck in our homes because drivers weren't worried about giving each other COVID because they had masks and helmets on as part of the safety procedures of racing. So I think there's been a bit of a boost popularity-wise for racing overall recently. But I think, having a driver do the double on a day that a lot of Americans are celebrating a 3-day weekend, and I know you guys up north who had to work didn't get Memorial Day off, but the day that a lot of people are off, it brings a lot of attention to the sport. I think, seeing that someone can do this and the logistics of it, flying from one place to another immediately after the first race, and if someone could win the double or do well, I don't think anyone's ever going to win if they do the double. It's just so difficult to win a racing in general. But if someone can finish top 10 or top 20 in both races, or just do really well in both races, it's going to bring a lot of attention. And that's the kind of thing that's going to get, SportsCenter I didn't see SportsCenter on race day. It may not give a lot of attention to the Indy 500. It'd be a few minutes, maybe one short segment of highlights. But if someone does the double, all of a sudden it gets more attention. SportsCenter may give a few minutes to NASCAR and a few minutes to IndyCar, but now they've given a few more minutes to it. So I think that is definitely huge for the sport.
It is. It's absolutely huge just for the sport of racing in general.
Mm-hmm.
No matter which one you prefer, and it does generally seem to be okay. I like Indy over NASCAR, or vice versa. And
I don't get that. You can like both.
Exactly right. You can like both. There's nothing.
You can't watch both at the same time if they're on at the same time. But you can like both though.
Exactly. The more racing, the better, I think.
Actually, you can watch both at the same time. People have multi-screen setups now.
They've got better attention.
Anyway, I derailed you. Carry on. I'm sorry.
No, they got better attention to detail than me, man. It's like when you go to bingo and someone's got like 10 cards in front of them. I can't fathom that. It's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, so no.
Keeping track of the leaderboard on two different types of racing, not so much. That doesn't work for me. But I think it was a really good weekend of racing. Monaco is Monaco to talk about F1. I think that track is all about the spectacle. We know that.
Yeah, it's a boring race.
And because the cars are so big now compared to what they were in the 70s and 80s, it's a completely different race. There's not going to be any passing because the cars are so big. And big being a relative term.
Yeah, they're still smaller than a street car. But yeah.
It's much smaller, but, just in a relative term to what the cars used to be 35 years ago. But it's, it's always entertaining to see when someone does try to do the double. The Coke 600's a heck of a race, and we'll be talking about something different next week when we're back on the podcast talking about NASCAR for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I know this is a NASCAR segment, and that's what we focus on here, but I do want to mention the Indy 500 racing. You're never guaranteed a good race, ever in any series. It doesn't matter. People say, there's no passing in F1. There's no passing on the super speedway in NASCAR. You're never guaranteed a good race. It's like any sport. You might tune into a game and you think it's going to be good, and it turns out to be a blowout or not interesting. That's one reason why I love sports so much is because you don't know what you're going to see, and that's not really true of much else, right? You go to watch a movie, there might be a plot twist or something, or a TV show, but you generally know what's coming, right? Even if you're watching a TV show, even if it's known for cliffhangers and plot twists, there's a framework and an expectation. There's very few things, maybe a character death or something, that could really shock you. With sports, you might tune into a game and it might be like a Super Bowl or something really hype, that's something that everyone pays attention to, and it may end up being boring. We've all seen boring Super Bowls or whatever. But my point is, you tune in never knowing what to expect. In Indy, we didn't know what to expect, especially with the rain, especially with the race being pushed back 4 hours. That affects the track. It affects the cars. We saw a bunch of Honda engines blow up. But we ended up getting a good race. And like a lot of Indy races, like a lot of NASCAR races too, it was the best racing was in the final 20 laps because the drivers hold something back. They make sure they don't crash out. They make sure they avoid any other crashes. They make sure they massage the car mechanically to make sure it gets to the end. They make sure they don't run out of gas or anything stupid like that. And then 20, 25 laps to go. They've had their last pit stop. They go for it. They know that at that point, if something does go wrong, they've got a lot of laps in. They've gotten their money's worth, so to speak. And so they go for it, and we had a last lap pass, and then another last lap pass, or second to last lap, something like that. We had Pato O'Ward passing Joseph Newgarden. You think O'Ward's going to win, but he passed Newgarden just a little too early, and Newgarden had enough time to catch up to him, pass him again, and hold on for the win. So he had a really entertaining race. And that was all I really wanted to say about Indy was once we sat through all that delay, it was a great race. Unfortunately, NASCAR didn't quite get there, but that's not really NASCAR's fault because of the rain. And I really feel like had Charlotte been able to finish, I think we might have had one of those races that was kind of boring for 3/4 of it and then got good in the final 20, 30 laps, which we've talked about in the podcast a few times now with several different races this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the next time we go back to Charlotte, it's going to be completely different because it'll be the Roval during the playoffs, right? During the solo play.
Yeah.
And they're changing the Roval a bit for this year. They're going to extend the straightaway coming out of turn 5, I think. A new turn 6, if I remember, and a much sharper hairpin in turn 7. So it's still going to be the same length. It's still going to be whatever that is, the 2.whatever miles, 2.28 miles, I think. 2.25. But they're going to have, I think there's going to be some more passing opportunities, especially there into that new hairpin in turn 7. So the next time we're talking about Charlotte on the podcast, looking towards the future, we're going to have a little bit of a different road course than we've had in the past, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and speaking of looking forward to things, we're going to wrap this segment up. Unless you have anything more to add on Charlotte and Indy, I think I've said all I wanted to say about the rain and the double. I would have more to say about the double had Kyle been able to complete it. But is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, other than, always an entertaining weekend of racing.
Yeah, and it's become a more Memorial Day thing for me. And when I was younger, there were things going on. I didn't always have a chance to. I've always loved Indy, but I never had a chance to. Some years I had like baseball tickets on that Sunday and had to miss part of the race or all the race. And so I'm kind of glad I was able to sit. And this is back when it was harder to record stuff. So I'm kind of glad I was able to sit and watch it this year. And it was, it's just really too bad NASCAR couldn't get their race in due to weather, because it would have been really great to just kind of veg on the couch and get 3 races in and all that. I mean, yeah, I had the dinner plans, but I could have easily came back and finished the race. It would have been great to see all 3 races, and hopefully next year I'll be able to. And hopefully next year Kyle Larson will be doing the double. And what I was going to say is, speaking of looking forward to things, looking forward to Iowa. I believe it's Iowa, or is it Missouri? Gateway Motorsports Park next week. That is actually in Illinois, technically, but it's in the St. Louis area, which in my mind as a northern Illinoisan, I think of that as St. Louis, even though it's same state that I live in. Those of us who live in
the regional thing, yeah,
we think of Metro East as being St. Louis, even though it's Illinois. Yeah, so it's in Illinois next week. I thought it was Iowa. Iowa's coming up though, pretty soon in the schedule. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and we'll be talking about that on our next episode. So with that, Matthew, do you have anything more to say on racing? Otherwise, we'll wrap our segment.
No, that sounds good to me, man. Thanks for having me on, Tim.
Excellent. We will be back talking NASCAR next week, and we will wrap our NASCAR segment for today here on the Truth About Cars podcast. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. And that's all for this edition of the Truth About Cars podcast. We thank John Vincent, Senior Editor and Correspondent, Vehicle Testing at U.S. News and World Report. We also thank TTAC contributor Matthew Guy for stopping by. I'm Tim Healy. I'm the Managing Editor for the Truth About Cars. You can find us at TTAC.com. That's TTAC.com. Or the Truth About Cars, all spelled out.com. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again to John and Matthew, and we thank you for listening as well.